The cold was a thief. It stole the feeling from Alara's fingertips, the warmth from her breath, and the hope from the deepest corners of her heart. Snow fell in a lazy, silent swirl, each flake a tiny shard of ice against her exposed cheeks. It was Christmas Eve, and the city of Crestwood was dressed in its finest holiday attire. Golden light spilled from shop windows, painting the snowy sidewalks in warm, inviting hues. The scent of roasted chestnuts and cinnamon-dusted pastries drifted on the air, a cruel taunt to the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. From where she stood, huddled in the shadows of a grand stone archway, she could see families hurrying by, their arms laden with brightly wrapped packages. Laughter echoed in the crisp air, mingling with the distant, cheerful chime of a Salvation Army bell. Each joyful sound was like a pinprick against her soul. She clutched the thin fabric of her coat tighter, a garment that was more a memory of warmth than a provider of it. It had been her husband Mark's, and it hung loosely on her frame, smelling faintly of the cedar chest where she'd kept his things until she had nothing left but them. Inside her pocket, her gloveless fingers traced the worn edges of a photograph. It was creased and soft from countless moments just like this one, when touching it was the only comfort she could find. It showed Mark, his arm wrapped around her, both of them squinting into a summer sun that felt a lifetime away. His smile had been her anchor, the steady, unwavering light in her world. Now there was only this fading image and the crushing weight of his absence. A single hot tear escaped and traced a frozen path down her cheek. She wasn't just cold, she was invisible. People's eyes slid right past her, their gazes fixed on their festive destinations. She was a ghost haunting the edges of their happiness, a smudge of gray against a world of vibrant color. Desperation was a physical ache, a cold, hard knot in her chest that made it difficult to breathe. She had tried. She had looked for work, for help, for a single open door, but each had closed with a quiet finality. She had one thing left: her voice. It was the only gift she had ever truly possessed. The one Mark had always said was purer than freshly fallen snow. He had loved to hear her sing. Tonight, she would sing not for joy or for money, but simply to keep the silence at bay, to fill the vast, echoing cavern of her loneliness with something other than the mournful howl of the wind. Taking a shaky breath that plumed like smoke in the frigid air, she began to sing. Her voice, thin and trembling at first, rose into the night. It was a simple carol, one of quiet hope and gentle peace, a melody that felt like a prayer whispered into the uncaring dark. Inside the stately brownstone at number 12, Julian Croft stared into the fireplace, but he didn't see the dancing flames. He saw the ghost of a memory, his wife, Sarah, her face illuminated by the same firelight 2 Christmases ago, her laughter filling the room. Now the silence in the house was a presence of its own, heavy and suffocating. The grandly decorated tree in the corner, with its twinkling lights and shimmering ornaments, felt like a monument to a joy he could no longer access. He was a man who had built an empire from blueprints and ambition, a titan of industry whose name was synonymous with success. He could command boardrooms and shape city skylines, but he could not mend the fractured pieces of his own heart. Grief had hollowed him out, leaving a careful, guarded shell. His world had shrunk to a single, fiercely protected point of light: his daughter, Lily. Lily sat on the plush rug, a picture book open on her lap, but she wasn't looking at the pages. Her small, serious face was turned towards the window, her brow furrowed with a concentration that was achingly familiar. She had her mother's eyes, wide and deeply empathetic, capable of seeing things that most adults had long since learned to ignore. "Daddy," she said, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the quiet hum of the house. "Someone is singing." Julian turned from the fire, his own attention drawn to the faint, ethereal sound that drifted through the thick panes of glass. It was a woman's voice, pure and sorrowful, a thread of silver melody woven into the fabric of the winter night. He felt a flicker of annoyance. Carolers. He had no time for manufactured cheer, for strangers expecting a handout in exchange for a few verses of a song he no longer wished to hear. "It's just carolers, sweetie," he said, his tone more dismissive than he intended. "They'll move on." But Lily shook her head, her gaze remaining fixed on the snow-dusted street outside. "No," she insisted, with the unshakable certainty of a child. "She's not happy. She sounds sad, like you do sometimes when you think I'm asleep." The observation struck Julian with the force of a physical blow, cracking the careful armor he wore each day. He knelt beside his daughter, his heart aching. He tried so hard to shield her from the depths of his own sorrow, to be the stoic protector she needed. But she saw. Of course she saw. He followed her gaze out the window. Through the swirling snow, he could just make out a figure huddled in the archway across the street. A woman barely more than a silhouette, her head bowed against the wind. It was from her that the hauntingly beautiful music came. The melody was one of hope, but the voice that carried it was steeped in a profound and unmistakable melancholy. It was the sound of a heartbreaking. Without another word, Lily slipped off the rug. She padded over to the hall closet and pulled on her small red boots. Then she retrieved her coat, a cheerful rose-pink garment that stood in stark contrast to the somber mood of the house. She looked at her father, her expression not one of defiance, but of simple, irrefutable purpose. "We have to help her, Daddy," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's Christmas Eve. Mommy would have." The mention of her mother was a key turning a lock in his chest. Sarah had been the heart of their home, a woman whose kindness was as natural and effortless as breathing. She would have been the first one out the door, a warm blanket and a thermos of cocoa in her hands. In his grief, Julian had forgotten that part of himself, the part that Sarah had nurtured. He had become a fortress, protecting his daughter from the world, but perhaps he had also been locking out the very thing they both needed, a reason to hope. He looked at his daughter standing there so small and so determined, a beacon of pure, uncomplicated empathy. For the first time in a long time, he felt a path forward that wasn't shrouded in fog. He nodded slowly, a decision solidifying within him. He took his own heavy coat from the hook, the silence of the house replaced by the quiet rustle of wool and the determined zip of a child's coat. Outside, the cold was sharp and biting. The snow crunched under their boots as they crossed the quiet street. Alara's song faltered as she saw them approach, a man and a little girl, emerging from the warm glow of the house opposite. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in her stomach. She expected them to tell her to move on, to complain about the noise. She braced herself for the dismissal, another small cruelty in a day full of them. Julian stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable, a mixture of caution and something else she couldn't quite name. He was tall and imposing, his face etched with a quiet sorrow that seemed at odds with his expensive coat and confident posture. But it was the child who held her gaze. The little girl, her face framed by a pink hood, looked at her not with pity, but with a startling directness, her eyes full of a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. Lily took a step forward, breaking away from her father's protective hand. She walked right up to Alara, her boots making soft prints in the fresh snow. She stopped just before her, so close Alara could see the tiny snowflakes clinging to her eyelashes, like delicate jewels. The little girl didn't say anything at first. She just looked, her gaze soft and searching. Then she reached out with her small, mittened hands and, without a word of warning, wrapped her arms around Alara's waist. The gesture was so unexpected so pure and unhesitating that it completely dismantled Alara's defenses. It wasn't a hug of pity, it was a hug of connection, of simple, profound human warmth offered in the face of absolute cold. The physical contact, the small body pressing against her own, the faint scent of cinnamon and home that clung to the child's coat. It was too much. A dam inside Alara that had been holding back months of grief, fear, and loneliness finally broke. It didn't happen with a loud crash, but with a silent, shuddering release. Her body began to tremble uncontrollably. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from her throat, but it made no sound. Tears, hot and blinding, streamed down her face, freezing almost instantly in the frigid air. She didn't cry out, she simply wept, her entire being convulsing with the weight of her sorrow, her hands still clutching the worn photograph in her pocket. From his position a few feet away, Julian watched the scene unfold, his heart clenching in his chest. He saw the woman's carefully constructed composure shatter into a million pieces at his daughter's simple touch. He saw not a beggar or a nuisance, but a person drowning in a sea of private pain. The silent, body-shaking sobs were more powerful than any scream. It was the sound of someone who had been holding on for so long that they had forgotten how to let go. His initial caution melted away, replaced by a wave of empathy so strong it nearly buckled his knees. He saw his own grief reflected in her desolate form, his own loneliness mirrored in her isolation. He had built walls around his heart to keep the pain in, but he realized now that those same walls had been keeping kindness out. He moved forward, his steps slow and deliberate. Without a word, he began to unwind the thick cashmere scarf from around his own neck. It was warm from his body, a deep charcoal gray that felt soft and substantial in his hands. He gently draped it around Alara's shoulders, over the thin, inadequate fabric of her coat. The wool was incredibly soft, carrying the faint, clean scent of cedar and something uniquely masculine. Alara flinched at his touch, her head snapping up, her eyes wide and swimming with tears were a startling shade of green like moss after a rain. They were filled with confusion, fear, and a glimmer of disbelief. She looked from the man's somber face to the child still clinging to her waist, as if trying to make sense of a dream. "Please," Julian said, his voice deeper and softer than she would have expected. It was a voice accustomed to command, but now it held a note of gentle persuasion. "It's too cold out here, come inside. Just for a little while, for some hot chocolate." Alara's first instinct was to refuse, to pull away, to retreat back into the shadows where she belonged. She was a burden, a problem. Kindness from strangers was a language she no longer understood. It felt dangerous, a prelude to a debt she could never repay. She opened her mouth to say no, to thank them, and disappear back into the anonymity of the night. But then the little girl looked up at her, her small face tilted, her expression one of earnest pleading. "Please," Lily echoed her father, her voice a tiny bell in the quiet street. "You can't be sad on Christmas Eve. It's a rule." The child's simple, profound logic cut through Alara's fear. It was a rule from a world she had almost forgotten, a world where kindness was not a transaction but a simple truth. She looked at the warm, glowing windows of the house behind them, a beacon in the snowy darkness. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a flicker of something other than despair stirred within her. It was a fragile, tentative thing, as delicate as a newborn flame, but it was there. It was hope. She gave a small, jerky nod, unable to trust her voice. Lily's face broke into a radiant smile. She took Alara's frozen hand in her own small, warm one, her mitten a patch of comforting wool against Alara's icy skin. She began to lead her across the street, a small, determined guide leading a lost soul out of the wilderness. Julian fell into step beside them, a silent, watchful guardian, the empty space on his neck a testament to the first crack in his fortress. The warmth inside the house was immediate and enveloping. It was a physical presence that seeped into Alara's chilled bones, making her skin prickle and her head swim. The air smelled of pine from the magnificent Christmas tree and the lingering sweet scent of baking. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a gentle flickering light across a room that was both elegant and comfortable, filled with books and soft furniture. It was a home, not just a house. It was everything she had lost. Lily led her to a plush armchair near the fire, her grip on Alara's hand never wavering. "You sit here," she instructed with gentle authority. "Daddy will make the cocoa. He makes the best." Julian nodded, disappearing into what Alara assumed was the kitchen. She was left alone with the child and the crackling fire. She sat stiffly on the edge of the chair, the luxurious cashmere scarf still draped around her shoulders. It felt impossibly soft, a circle of profound warmth. She felt out of place, a stray brought in from the storm, her damp, worn coat, a mark of her otherness in this beautiful, safe space. She half expected to be told it was all a mistake, to be sent back out into the cold. But Lily simply curled up on the rug at her feet, looking up at her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "My name is Lily," she said. What's yours?" "Alara," she whispered, her voice hoarse from the cold and from crying. "That's a pretty name," Lily said matter-of-factly. "It sounds like a song." She paused, then added, "Your song was very pretty, but it was sad. Why were you singing a sad song on Christmas?" Alara didn't know how to answer. How could she explain the complexities of grief and loss to a child? How could she describe the crushing weight of a world that had moved on without her? She looked down at her hands, twisting them in her lap. I was missing someone," she finally managed to say, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. Lily nodded sagely. "I miss my mommy," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if sharing a sacred secret. "She went to be a star. Daddy says she's the brightest one, so we can always find her." The simple, heartbreaking confession created an instant, powerful bond between them. Alara's own loss, which had felt so isolating, was suddenly a shared landscape. She was not the only one navigating the terrain of grief. She reached out and placed a hand on Lily's head, her fingers sinking into the child's soft hair. "I'm missing my husband," Alara confessed in return, the words coming more easily now. "He's a star now, too." At that moment, Julian returned, carrying a tray with 3 steaming mugs. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. The woman, his daughter, and the quiet, shared moment of understanding that seemed to hang in the air between them. He had overheard their exchange, and the vulnerability in Alara's voice, the quiet dignity with which she spoke of her loss, moved him deeply. He set the tray down on a low table. He handed a mug to Alara, his fingers brushing against hers. The ceramic was warm, a solid, comforting weight in her trembling hands. The rich, sweet scent of chocolate rose to meet her. He then gave a mug to Lily before taking the last one for himself, settling into the chair opposite Alara. For a while they drank in silence, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the soft sips from their mugs. The hot liquid slid down Alara's throat, a river of warmth that seemed to thaw her from the inside out. It was more than just a drink. It was an act of profound care, a simple gesture that said, "You are safe here. You can rest." Julian watched her over the rim of his mug. He saw the way she cradled the cup as if it were a precious treasure, the way her shoulders had begun to relax ever so slightly. The tear tracks on her cheeks were still visible in the firelight, but the desperate, haunted look in her eyes had softened, replaced by a weary sort of wonder. "Lily is right," he said. his voice quiet but steady. "You have a beautiful voice." Alara looked up, surprised by the directness of his compliment. "Thank you," she murmured, dropping her gaze back to her mug. "It's all I have left of him, in a way. He loved to hear me sing." She felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to explain, to make him understand that she wasn't just some vagrant. She wanted him to see the person she used to be. Reaching into her coat pocket, her fingers found the worn photograph. With trembling hands, she pulled it out and held it forward. "This was my husband, Mark," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He was a carpenter. He could build anything, but he couldn't build a defense against the illness that took him." Julian took the photograph gently from her hand. He studied the smiling faces, the bright sun, the easy happiness captured in that frozen moment. He saw a vibrant young woman, her face full of life and love, and a man whose eyes shone with adoration for her. It was a portrait of a life that had been brutally interrupted. He felt his own story rising to the surface, demanding to be shared. It was something he rarely did, preferring to keep his grief private, a sacred space no one else could enter. But looking at Alara, at the raw, undisguised pain in her eyes, he felt a kinship that transcended the boundaries of strangers. "He looks like a good man," Julian said, handing the photo back to her with reverence. He then gestured to a silver-framed picture on the mantelpiece. It showed a woman with a warm, radiant smile and the same kind, perceptive eyes as Lily. "That was my wife, Sarah, Lily's mother. It was a car accident 2 years ago." He said the words plainly, without adornment, but Alara could hear the universe of pain contained within them. She looked at the photograph of the smiling woman and then at the small girl on the floor, and her heart ached with a fresh wave of sorrow, not just for herself, but for them. They were a family fractured by loss, just as she was a person fractured by it. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I am too," he replied, and in that simple exchange, a bridge was built between them. They were no longer just a wealthy man and a homeless woman. They were two people who understood the specific, hollowed-out shape of loss. They had both navigated the lonely shores of grief, and in this warm, fire-lit room, their ships had found a common harbor. The silence that followed was no longer heavy or awkward, but filled with a profound, shared understanding. The hot chocolate was gone, the mugs empty on the table, but the warmth lingered. Alara felt a deep, bone-weary exhaustion settle over her. The kind that comes after a long and brutal storm has finally passed. The adrenaline that had kept her moving for days, for weeks, was finally draining away, leaving her feeling fragile and exposed in this cocoon of safety. Julian noticed the slump of her shoulders, the way her eyelids drooped. "You can't go back out there tonight," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We have a guest room. It's warm and safe. Please, stay the night." Alara's mind reeled. A room, a bed. The thought was so overwhelmingly wonderful that it felt like a fantasy, but the old instincts of pride and fear kicked in. "I couldn't possibly impose," she started, the words automatic. "You've already been too kind." "It's not an imposition," Julian countered firmly, his gaze steady. "It's the right thing to do. Lily wouldn't have it any other way. Would you, sweetie?" Lily, who had been listening intently, scrambled to her feet. "You have to stay," she insisted, her small hand finding Alara's again. "We have fuzzy blankets, and in the morning we can have pancakes. It's a Christmas rule, too." Faced with their combined, gentle insistence, Alara's resistance crumbled. The thought of stepping back into the biting cold, of facing another night of uncertainty and fear was unbearable. Here was an offer of sanctuary, a brief respite from the harsh reality of her life. It was a gift, freely given, and she found herself, for the first time in a long time, willing to accept it. She made a conscious choice to trust in this unexpected kindness. "Okay," she whispered, the single word feeling momentous. "Thank you." Julian led her upstairs to a room at the end of the hall. It was simple but beautiful, with a large window overlooking the snowy garden. The bed was turned down, the sheets crisp and white. On a chair, someone had laid out a set of soft-looking pajamas and a thick, fluffy robe. "The bathroom is just across the hall," Julian said from the doorway. "There are fresh towels. If you need anything at all, just call." He paused, his expression softening. "Rest well, Elara." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Elara stood in the middle of the room, feeling as though she had stepped into another life. She ran her hand over the smooth, cool cotton of the pajamas. She touched the soft quilt on the bed. A hot shower washed away the grime of the streets and the lingering chill that had settled deep in her bones. Wrapped in the thick robe, she felt human again. When she slipped between the clean sheets, a soft, involuntary sigh of relief escaped her lips. It had been so long since she had felt the simple luxury of a real bed, of a safe, quiet room. Sleep came for her quickly, a deep, dreamless slumber that was a mercy in itself. She was safe. For one night, she was truly safe. The next morning, Elara awoke to the pale light of Christmas Day filtering through the window. For a confusing moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memory of the previous night rushed back. The cold, the song, the little girl's hug, the warm house. A wave of anxiety washed over her. It had been a temporary reprieve. Today she would have to leave, to return to her reality. She dressed in her own clothes, which had been mysteriously taken, dried, and returned to her room while she slept. As she made her way downstairs, the delicious smell of coffee and sizzling bacon guided her to the kitchen. Julian was at the stove, flipping pancakes, while Lily sat at the table, carefully drawing on a piece of paper. The scene was so domestic, so normal, that it made Elara's heart ache. "Good morning," Julian said, turning with a small smile. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face, chasing away some of the shadows from his eyes. "Sleep well." "Like a stone," she admitted, her voice still thick with sleep. "Thank you for everything." "Pancakes are ready," he announced, sliding a plate stacked high in front of an empty seat. "Lily's Christmas rule." They ate together, the conversation easy and light. Lily chattered about her new drawing and the presents she hoped Santa had brought. Elara found herself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that felt rusty from disuse. For a little while she was able to forget the world outside, to simply exist in this small bubble of warmth and kindness. After breakfast, as Elara was mentally preparing herself to leave, Julian led her into the living room. It was the grand room from the night before, but in the daylight, she noticed something she hadn't seen in the dim firelight. Tucked into an alcove, gleaming in the morning sun, was a beautiful baby grand piano, its dark wood polished to a high sheen. Elara stopped, her breath catching in her throat. She hadn't touched a piano since before Mark had gotten sick. Music had been her life, her passion. She had taught it, played it, breathed it. But after his death, the silence had been too loud. The joy of playing too painful a reminder of what she had lost. Her own keyboard had been one of the last things she sold. Julian saw the look on her face, the mixture of longing and sorrow. "It was Sarah's," he explained softly. "She used to play for hours. The house hasn't heard music since she's been gone. I don't know how to play." He gestured towards the piano bench. "Please," he said, his voice gentle. "If you'd like." Hesitantly, Elara approached the instrument as if it were a sleeping animal. She ran her fingers lightly over the smooth, cool keys, not pressing down, just reacquainting herself with the feel of them. It felt like coming home. She sat on the bench, her back straight, her hands hovering over the keyboard. Then she began to play. It wasn't a Christmas carol this time. It was a soft, melancholic piece, a melody that spoke of loss and longing, but also of a quiet, resilient beauty. The music filled the silent house, pouring into every corner, chasing away the ghosts of grief. The notes were hesitant at first, then grew stronger, more confident as her muscle memory returned. It was her own story, told in a language more powerful than words. Julian stood by the fireplace, listening, his eyes closed. The music washed over him, and for the first time in 2 years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive. Alara's playing wasn't just technically proficient, it was deeply emotional, a raw and honest expression of her soul. He heard her pain, but he also heard her strength, her hope, her capacity for beauty, even in the midst of despair. He realized that the silence he had been preserving wasn't reverence, it was stagnation. Alara's music was like a fresh spring, bringing life back to a barren land. When the final note faded into silence, the room was still. Lily, who had crept in to listen, had tears in her eyes. "That was for Mommy, wasn't it?" she whispered. Alara looked at the child and nodded, her own eyes glistening. "And for Mark," she added softly. Playing again hadn't just been a performance. It had been a release, a way of honoring her grief while also taking the first step out of it. It was the reawakening of a part of herself she thought had died forever. Later that day, after they had opened a few simple gifts Julian had managed to procure for her, a warm sweater, thick socks, a new journal, he approached her as she stood looking out at the snow-covered garden. "Alara," he began, his tone serious, "I want to make you an offer. It's not charity, it's a proposal. Lily, she adores you, and this house, it needs music, it needs life again. I need a governess for Lily, someone to help with her studies, her music, someone to just be here. The guest room would be yours, of course, with a proper salary. Please, consider it." He rushed the words out, as if afraid she would refuse, before he finished. The justification was practical, but the real reason was clear in his eyes. It wasn't just about Lily. It was about the light she had brought back into their home, into their lives. He attributed it to his daughter's infallible intuition, telling himself that Lily had recognized Alara's inherent goodness from the very beginning. Alara was stunned into silence. A job, a home, a purpose. It was more than she had dared to dream of. It was a lifeline thrown to her, just as she was about to go under. The fear and pride that had been her constant companions for months whispered warnings in her ear, but the look on Julian's face and the memory of Lily's hug shouted louder. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, I would like that very much." The weeks that followed unfolded like a dream. A new routine settled into place, as comfortable and natural as the changing of the seasons. Mornings were for lessons, afternoons for music, and evenings for quiet family dinners by the fire. Alara's presence transformed the house. Laughter, a sound that had been absent for too long, became a regular occurrence. The piano was no longer a silent monument to the past, but a living, breathing source of joy. Alara, in turn, began to heal. With the constant threat of hunger and cold lifted, the color returned to her cheeks. The haunted, weary look in her eyes was replaced by a gentle brightness. She found joy in the small things, the way Lily's face would light up when she mastered a new piece on the piano, the quiet camaraderie of sharing a cup of tea with Julian after Lily was in bed, the simple peace of watching snow fall from a warm, safe window. Julian watched her transformation with a growing sense of wonder and a feeling he was afraid to name. He found himself looking for excuses to be near her, to hear her laugh. He started coming home from the office earlier, drawn by the pull of the life that was blooming within his once silent walls. He expressed his growing affection not with grand words, but with small, thoughtful actions. He noticed her old coat was threadbare and a new, warm, rose-pink one appeared in her closet. He saw her struggling with a loose page in an old music book and the next day found it, professionally rebound, on the piano. Each gesture was a quiet admission of the space she was beginning to occupy in his heart. Their evenings together became a cherished ritual. After Lily was asleep, they would sit in the living room, the fire crackling between them, and talk for hours. They spoke of the people they had lost, not with the raw pain of fresh grief, but with the gentle fondness of memory. They shared stories of Mark's terrible jokes and Sarah's infectious laugh, building a bridge between their pasts. In sharing their wounds, they found a profound and unexpected healing. One evening, about 2 months after her arrival, Ilara was playing the piano softly, a simple improvisational melody. Julian was sitting in his usual chair, ostensibly reading a book, but he hadn't turned a page in 10 minutes. "You've changed this house, Ilara," he said suddenly, his voice startling her out of her musical reverie. "You've changed us. Before you came, we were just existing, going through the motions. You brought the music back, in every sense of the word." Ilara turned on the piano bench to face him, her heart beating a little faster. "You saved my life, Julian," she replied, her voice soft but certain. "You and Lily. You saw me when no one else did." He stood up and walked over to the piano, closing the small distance between them. He stood before her, his expression serious, his eyes searching hers. "I think," he said slowly, "I was the one who needed saving. I had forgotten how to live. I was so focused on protecting Lily from more pain that I built walls so high I couldn't see the sun." The air between them crackled with unspoken emotions. The long months of shared glances, quiet smiles, and gentle care had woven a bond between them that was deeper than friendship. It was something more fragile, more tentative, and infinitely more terrifying. "I'm scared, Julian," Ilara confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I never thought I could feel this way again. It feels like a betrayal to Mark." Julian knelt before her, taking her hands in his. His touch was warm and steady. "I know," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I feel it too, as if I'm betraying Sarah's memory. But I don't think they would want us to live in the shadows forever. I think they would want us to find the light again." He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. "Ilara, I think I'm falling in love with you." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of relief, of a joy so profound it was almost painful. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered back. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. She met him halfway. Their first kiss was not one of fiery passion, but of gentle, hesitant discovery. It was a kiss of shared sorrows and newfound hope, a quiet promise of a new beginning. It was soft and sweet, and it felt like coming home. A small gasp from the doorway made them break apart. Lily stood there in her pajamas, a sleepy smile on her face. She wasn't shocked or confused. She was beaming. "See?" she said, with the simple, triumphant logic of a child who has known the truth all along. "I told you, hugs fix everything." They both laughed, a shared, gentle sound that sealed the moment, turning the three of them, a man who had lost his wife, a woman who had lost her husband, and a child who had lost her mother, into something new, a family. 6 months later, the city was bursting with the vibrant colors of summer. The sun shone down on the same street where Ilara had once huddled in the snow. But today, everything was different. She walked hand in hand with Julian, while Lily skipped ahead of them, chasing a butterfly. Ilara was no longer a ghost. She was radiant, her face full of a deep, settled happiness. She was the new music teacher at Lily's prestigious school, a position Julian's connections had helped her secure, but one her immense talent had earned her. They stopped at the stone archway, the very spot where their lives had converged. It no longer looked like a place of despair to Alara. It looked like the site of a miracle. Julian turned to face her, his expression full of a love so profound it took her breath away. "A year ago," he began, his voice soft, "this was the coldest, darkest place in the world for you, and my home was the coldest, darkest place for me. You came into our lives and filled our home with light and music. You saved me, Alara. You and Lily. You saved me from a life of silence." "And you saved me, Julian," she replied, her hand reaching up to cup his cheek. "You saw a person worth saving when all I saw was a failure. You gave me a home. You gave me a family." He took a small box from his pocket and knelt down on one knee, right there on the sidewalk where she had once sung for her survival. Lily stopped chasing her butterfly and watched, her hands clasped in delight. "Alara, I can't imagine another day without you in our lives," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion as he opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "I want to build a new life with you, filled with laughter and music and so much love. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife and Lily's mother?" Tears of pure joy streamed down Alara's face as she looked from Julian's hopeful face to Lily's ecstatic one. "Yes," she breathed, the word a prayer of thanks. "Yes, of course, yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. As he stood up to kiss her, a deep and loving kiss that promised a lifetime of happiness, Lily ran to them and threw her arms around both their waists, squeezing them into a family hug. "It's a new rule," Lily declared happily, her voice muffled against them. "Families have to hug all the time." And in that perfect sunlit moment, surrounded by the warmth of her new family, Alara knew that the little girl was right. Some rules were made to be followed. Their life together was a symphony, composed of quiet mornings and boisterous evenings, of piano duets and bedtime stories. The grand house on the corner was no longer a place of quiet grief, but a home filled to the brim with love. Julian, the guarded Tycoon, became a man who laughed easily and held his wife's hand at every opportunity. Alara, the woman who had lost everything, found that she had gained more than she had ever imagined possible. And Lily, the little girl with the wise and empathetic heart, blossomed in the warmth of a complete and loving family. They were a testament to the quiet power of a single, selfless act of kindness, proof that even in the coldest, darkest of nights, the smallest light can lead you home. And so, the woman who sang a carol of sorrow on a lonely Christmas Eve found herself living a life that was a song of pure and unending joy.